Thanks for choosing to listen to this Late Night Linux Family podcast. We're only able to do this because of the people who support us. None of our shows are paywalled, but our Patreon supporters can get most episodes early and never hear any ads. Learn more at latenightlinux.com/support or support us by telling a friend or colleague about everything we do. 2.5 Admins, episode 311. I'm Joe.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Alan.
And here we are again. And before we get started, your customary Clara article plug, Alan, is ZFS versus Ceph. Do you actually need Ceph?
Yeah, so in this, we compare ZFS versus Ceph, as they're both commonly used for making very large pools and systems, and look at when Ceph can be useful, but also what the trade-offs are. And especially if you have a latency-sensitive workload, why a local ZFS system might be much faster than what Ceph can do.
Right, well, link in the show notes as usual. Microsoft restores player's 25-year-old account following widespread backlash.
Yeah, so somebody's Microsoft Online account got locked down after a apparent hacking incident and them getting permanently suspended, but it happened to belong to a streamer who could make a lot of noise and said the compromised account contained decades of digital game purchases, important files, including his baby pictures of his kids. Microsoft initially confirmed the account had been compromised, but permanently suspended it instead of restoring access, leaving him not only out the history and everything that was in the account and all the purchases and games, but blocked out of his cloud storage and everything. And it really raises a lot of questions about this digital stuff and how much do you own it versus the service just could do whatever they want with it, and the dangers of using cloud storage this way.
Yeah, it's weird to think that normal people have their photos backed up like this. It's such a standard thing to just have one company, whether that's Apple or Google or Microsoft, whoever it is, like that's where your backup is. And so you have peace of mind, and then they just can kill your account and they're gone.
Well, I think the bigger problem here is if it's the backup, that's one thing. But with the way OneDrive works and the way a lot of things on phones work, it moves the only copy of the photo to the cloud to free up the space on your device. And then you're stuck with basically your only copy of the photo is now in the lockbox, right? If Microsoft takes away, if Google takes away my account that has backups of the photos off my phone, I still have my phone with my photos. But if the photos get moved to that account without me asking for it and then they take it away, now I don't have any of my photos. And yeah, it could be a real problem. A lot of people have the cloud as their primary storage rather than just the backup, meaning the loss of it is even worse.
Well, of course they do. That's the way these services are marketed. Google and Microsoft aren't saying, hey, we gave you this really free, convenient, cloud storage to use, but make sure you keep local backups. No, the party line is exactly the opposite of that. You don't need backups for the cloud storage because the best engineers in the world are making sure all the redundancy and all the backup and all the blah, 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 which all of us know is complete bullshit. Another thing that I want to point out here about Microsoft's reversal after first telling this guy that, no, your stuff is gone forever, this decision is irreversible, we can't restore purchases, they also stated that he couldn't get any of his OneDrive files back regardless because of end-to-end encryption. Quoting from Microsoft's email, additionally, if you had files stored in OneDrive, those files are no longer accessible. Due to encryption and privacy safeguards, even our engineers cannot retrieve them. While this outcome may not be ideal, it is necessary to ensure your personal data does not fall into the wrong hands. And yet, after this went viral, somehow they restored all of it.
Yeah, because I'm guessing the decryption key is stored in the account at Microsoft, not on your device, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to restore if you just lost your device. And so yeah, end-to-end encrypted, but where Microsoft holds all the keys, and in this case, maybe could also give the keys to other people if they were subpoenaed to do so.
End-to-end encrypted, only it turns out Microsoft is one of those ends.
Both of those ends in this case, right? They're the storage and they have both sides of the key. And yeah, really stretching the definition of end-to-end encryption there.
iOS 27 code suggests Apple could restrict leased devices after missed payments. So what we're talking about here is Apple's upcoming service where you can effectively lease devices from them. And if you don't pay, there's a mechanism to shut you out of all but the most essential apps, like, the phone and stuff like that. But all of the apps that you want to use, you won't be able to if you don't keep up your payment.
Yeah, basically it has a fixed allow list where you're only able to use the accessibility reader, the App Store, Apple Health, the magnifier, phone, clock, settings, wallet, passwords, and the restricted mode interface itself. And maybe some critical alerts will get through, but everything else is basically locked down until you catch up on your payments.
Jim, you have told the couch cushion story at least once, and this reeks of it to me.
It does. For those of you who haven't heard the couch cushion, in my 20s, I briefly worked as a collections agent for a rent-to-own store. And our practice was to go visit the homes of people who had not paid their bill and either repossess the things that they were renting or get the payment on site. And once somebody did not have the money for their couch, and I didn't have the room in my van to put the whole couch, so I just took the couch cushions. And even the manager of the rent-to-own store was horrified by my predatory actions and made me go give those people their couch cushions back. But Apple does not seem to have the morals of the rent-to-own store manager that I worked for in 1996.
But it is essentially the same thing. It's Apple taking away your couch cushions.
I want to go back to the thing that people usually complain about me doing, which is the car analogy. People have been leasing cars for a very long time, and leasing cars is already frequently viewed as a sucker move. But the car companies don't just reach out and disable your car if you miss a lease payment. There's a lot more going on there, and I think there's good reason for that. I don't like this idea of it becoming commonplace and normal for companies to just retain the ability to reach out to devices that you acquired from that company and disable them for whatever reason that company doesn't like. There needs to be a little bit more separation than that. And there needs to be a concept of it's not okay to punch down, right? Like, I get it. It's not fair to a company if you missed your lease payment and, your contract involved you making regular payments. And yes, that is unfair to the company, but also that is a large company and you are an individual. And there's supposed to be, just as there's an asymmetry between the amount of power, from an entire potentially multi-billion-dollar company and you as an individual, there should also be some asymmetry in terms of like how much one party gets to damage the other.
Yeah. If you're interested in like taking this thought a little further, Cory Doctorow's book, Unauthorized Bread, where it talks kind of a sci-fi future where your fridge and your toaster and so on are all kind of like this. And, it's like, oh, you can't put that kind of bread in this toaster. It has to be, the right kind of bread, kind of thinking like Keurig pods and so on. But also like your fridge has ransomware and won't let you in unless you pay Bitcoin to it. And, a lease device like this would be like locking you out because you haven't paid. Or to Jim's point, what if Apple just has a billing confusion and thinks you haven't paid even though you have and now has locked you out of your device?
For that matter, what happens when Apple or whoever has implemented something like this for a while? They have these draconian controls in place to make sure nobody violates their lease agreement, and they realize, hey, we actually just went to a subscription model on hardware. Let's stop selling it at all. Let's just lease it. And then we as consumers wind up living in a world where you don't get to own anything. Everything is just rented from a tech giant. We're already getting closer and closer to that future. That is one of the things that Dr. O hints at. Well, goes a little further than hinting at. It's what he portrays in Unauthorized Bread and many other works. And it's not just Dr. O anymore. We're all seeing that future inching closer and closer. And I think we need to fight back against it.
You mentioned cars. I'm seeing some evidence, just quickly having a search, that Tesla has disabled vehicles after non-payment.
Of course it has.
Yeah, that seems to be anecdotal, though, so don't quote me on it, but it really wouldn't surprise me if these anecdotes were true.
It would not surprise me either. I have seen a lot of rather believable reports of Teslas getting remotely disabled for any number of reasons, and I don't remember any of the details clearly enough to want to go on the record about them, but for now, let's just say I'm with Joe on, I have no difficulty believing that. A standard car company, though, your GMs, your Fords, your Chryslers, for these companies, the overreach that people get really upset about is the idea just that they can use GPS to locate a vehicle that is no longer being paid for properly. And I think it's understandable to be concerned about that, even just about like, hey, the car company can just find out where my car is anytime it feels like it. That's also a bit of a privacy breach and, a warning of further Orwellian things that might come. But just reaching out and bricking it, that's a whole nother level. I think the last thing I want to say before we wrap this up on the topic of slippery slopes is, for right now, we're talking about limiting an iPhone to, this very narrow set of apps. And that's all we're talking about. But it is a very, very short step from that to periodically vibrating and setting off alarms to bother you about your payment. Do you want your phone going off at 3 a.m. every night, and flashing red and buzzing because you missed your lease payment? Apple's not threatening that right now, but that is an awfully short step away.
Yeah, I can also see a phone that just like, oh, you haven't paid? We're going to auto-reply to every text message you get telling them that you haven't paid. And try to shame you into paying your lease bill and so on.
Well, this is the problem with using a phone that is running proprietary software. You have no control over it. The company who makes it has their tendrils into it and can do whatever they want with it. And I wish that one of these Linux phone things had actually worked out and become a usable device, but it just hasn't, to me at least. And so I'm stuck, in my case, using a Pixel, but there's no reason why Google couldn't pull this kind of shit.
And since Joe brought up my shameful collections agent past, I'll point out another possibility that's only a short step away from what we're talking about here, where we start being actively anti-consumer, based on this idea of like a missed lease payment or whatever. One of the things that frequently happens in the collections world is, even if you can't manage to collect your own goods from somebody who's stiffing you, you look around and you see, is there a new car in the driveway? And you start calling the repo agencies around town and you find out, hey, are you looking for, a 1998 Ford Explorer, in Aqua, in this general vicinity, and say, yeah, that guy, did you see it? Where is it? Well, so this idea of like selling off the location of the person that you couldn't get the thing, it's just like a million other debt collection, frankly, scams where, one company sells on a debt to another company and another. And next thing you know, you've got all sorts of people bothering you about all sorts of things. And it just, this whole idea is just icky to me. Do not like.
We normally just do a quick mention of your Clara articles, Alan, but one of them that you published recently really hit home. If scrubs hurt, your ZFS design is broken. Now, every month on the second Sunday, Ubuntu by default does a scrub, and it makes my NAS not unusable, but I really, really notice a performance degradation. And that means that my ZFS design is broken. So please tell me, what am I doing wrong?
It depends. The idea here is if that maintenance operation, and with the second Sunday of every month doing a scrub, if that's making the performance of your system so bad that it's hurting the other workloads, then obviously you didn't design the system with enough headroom to do that workload and the scrub at the same time. And in the end, the scrub is not that intense. It's sustained for a long time, but it's not generally using all that many IOPS.
It's reading everything on the file system, right? But it's doing it with two elements.
Yes. So at the beginning, it does the scan pass, where it just goes through every object in the pool and reads the block pointer for that. And so the block pointer just says, the first block of that is over there on that hard drive, and the next block is over there on that hard drive. And it uses that to basically start building a list in memory of where on the hard drive it needs to read. And so it's doing this in order to build a list to try to do that as sequentially as possible. But in general, the scrub is kind of deprioritized, right? ZFS is going to not issue more than 3 commands outstanding to the drives at once so that the drive will be able to do other commands as well. And it's not going to put the read you're doing for your application at the end of a really long queue of commands that need to be done.
Yeah, so for example, on the Sunday night, which is when it starts at midnight, I do an edit and then I copy stuff onto my NAS via Samba, and I notice that that copy is somewhat slower than normal. It still gets there, but I notice that the performance isn't what it should be.
Right, so that doesn't necessarily mean your design is broken. If it doesn't cause you a problem for it to be a little bit slower, then it's kind of fine. But if it got to the point where it meant like it was slow enough that it meant you couldn't publish the episode on time, that's when your design would be broken. And you might consider, you need more capacity and IOPS and throughput in order to do all of the workload you want at once. In your case, it might just be that the default for Ubuntu is starting at midnight or whatever. Because you keep an odd schedule, you should shift that schedule and make it start at 3 a.m. after you've gone to bed. And knowing that even at 9 a.m., when normally it'd be a workday for everybody else, you're still asleep and it could finish the scrub while you're not using the machine.
I think it's probably also fair to say that if just it's slower and I notice that and it bothers me, that can qualify as broken. If that's enough of a problem for you to consider it to be a problem, then it's worth resolving. And the answer is just that your pool is already running way too close to the edge and how many IOPS it consumes, just in normal day-to-day operation. As Alan mentioned earlier, scrubs are specifically designed to be as low impact as possible, and they are also massively deprioritized compared to your actual workload. So if you don't have enough overhead to absorb a scrub without it visibly affecting what's going on, well, you're already kind of running on the bleeding edge, and you probably should design your pool with a little bit more headroom in it.
But my pool is just 2 spinning disks. That's it. I've got no SSDs involved. It's just a mirror of 2 disks. So what can I do?
Well, you don't necessarily have to do anything. But if you want it to be able to do the scrub and the copying at the same time, or to be able to, edit 4 episodes at once if you clone yourself a couple of times, then maybe you would need to consider having multiple VDEVs of mirrors of hard drives just so that you would have more IOPS. Because each hard drive is only giving you 200, 250 IOPS. And if you're using 50 or 100 of those for the scrub and causing all the seeking, then obviously writing that data is going to be a bit slower. If you need it to be faster, you need more disks. And then the scrub would basically be running at the same speed, but there'd be that much more throughput and IOPS left over to do your copying or whatever.
More disks is one option. Faster disks is also another, because when we're talking about a single 2-drive mirror, and Joe is saying that things slow down noticeably when a scrub is running, that tells me right away, we're talking about rust. We're not talking about solid state. If we were talking about solid state, we would have to be talking about the absolute worst garbage you've ever seen. There are some truly terrible SSDs out there, but in general, yeah, we're just right back to, look, you need a little bit more overhead. If seeing things slow down bothers you, well, as minimal as the impact of a scrub actually is, that means you need a little bit more overhead. So you could add 1 or 2 more mirrors. If you're using RAID Z right now, you could break that up and go to mirrors instead, because essentially the more VDEVs you have for the same number of disks, the faster your operations are going to go. If adding more drives or going from slower drives to faster drives is not an option, you could also consider a special VDEV, which can also greatly accelerate these kinds of operations and reduce the perceptible impact of IOPS-heavy workloads like this.
Yeah, in particular, the first part of the scrub, where it's going through every object and building that list of what needs to be scrubbed, is the really IOPS-intensive part. And it's also the part that happens most at the very beginning of the scrub. And it's why, the estimate it gives you when it first starts can be scary long, because it's going at the slowest rate because it's doing the worst possible thing for your hard drive. It's randomly seeking all over the drive in object order instead of on the order the things are written to the drive. That's why we have the sorted scrub feature, where we scan a bunch and build up a big list, and then we go and issue it, and we find big chunks of that and go and have the hard drive do that in a way that the hard drive is actually good at. But yeah, as to Jim's point, if you have a system, and maybe you already have 40 hard drives in your pool, it's a really big pool, and you need to be able to scrub it faster, having even just a single mirror of some NVMe drives that aren't even necessarily very big, and having all that metadata in there, it means all that seeking and randomness happens on the fast flash, but the sequential reads of the data happen on the hard drives, where the hard drives are not necessarily bad at that, right? They can do 200, 250 megabytes a second of sequential reads if you don't mix in a bunch of random 4K reads for metadata.
So how big is that metadata versus the actual data?
It really depends on what's on your pool and so on. If it's all big recording files of audio or video, it's probably 0.1% or less.
Right.
If you're storing tons of tiny files, or you have VMs or databases with really small record sizes set up, it could be as much as 5%.
Oh, right. But even then, you're not talking anywhere near the same amount of data, right?
Exactly. The metadata is mostly just a list of where on the hard drive each piece of the file is. And so if the pieces are smaller, because you're using a low record size for a VM or a database, then there'll be more metadata. But especially, if it's your media center or something, you probably don't care. Like, you're still going to be able to watch a movie while the scrub happens. And so in your media center, you probably don't care. But if it's running your VMs and running a scrub makes the VMs so slow they can't get their work done, or they fall behind, or the hypervisor complains about slow I/O, then you probably means that, you don't have enough IOPS. And you could run into the same problem if you just tried to start one more VM than you have now. That could also push you over the limit. And that's kind of the point of the article, is like the scrub is the fire drill. It's using up a bunch more of the capacity that you have, or the performance capacity you have, and showing you what the system would look like if it was a bit busier. And if that's so slow it's unusable, you might need to make sure you have more headroom so that when you spin up 2 more VMs, you're not finding that, my storage isn't fast enough for this anymore.
The last thing that's probably worth mentioning here is that, anything that you're doing that is inefficiently consuming more IOPS than it should can contribute to this kind of a problem. Maybe you're saying, well, hey, I'm already running mirrors. I'm already doing this. I'm already doing the other. I should have plenty of overhead, for this scrub. I'm not going to just add a bunch more disks. Well, that's when it might be time to start looking at things like, did you set your A shift correctly? Does your record size match, the typical access pattern of your workload? The kinds of things that Alan and I normally talk about more advanced tuning when you need like every last bit of performance. Those are also applicable here. I feel like there are probably a lot of folks out there that are doing everything on nothing but defaults, record size equals 128K, A shift, whatever ZFS set it to, and are perfectly happy. And as I always say, if you're happy, it's fine. You don't have to twiddle all the little knobs to get the maximum everything. But we're right back here to, Joe's situation where he's saying, well, I'm happy except when the scrub hits. And so that, again, might be an indication, well, do you have any databases running on this thing? Do you have this issue or that issue or the other issue that maybe you could tune a little bit better for than you are right now? Because ultimately, all you're trying to do is free up a few more IOPS.
Yeah, I think the other kind of red flag here is if after it's been running for a little bit, so, the estimates are highly variable for the first hour that the scrub's running. But if in the end the scrub's going to take 5 days or more, it probably means you need to consider being able to do that faster. Because if you have a RAID Z1 or RAID Z2, are you sure that you're not going to lose another drive in that time? And so if the scrub is going to take too long to finish, that's another reason why you might consider changing your design to get the scrub done faster by offloading the metadata part or just having more throughput or IOPS. Because you want the scrub to be able to finish. It's a fire drill for a resilver. Resilver is actually a little bit more work than a scrub in general, but the scrub, if it's intolerably slow to finish, even outside of the workload or because of the workload, right? The scrub is deprioritized. So if the amount of IOPS your VMs are using mean that a scrub is going to take 12 days, then a resilver is going to take that long. And is that acceptable? Or do you need to make sure you have some more headroom so that deprioritized scrub will actually finish in a reasonable number of days?
Let's do some free consulting then. But first, just a quick thank you to everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to 2.5admins.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to send in your questions for Jim and Alan or your feedback, you can email show@2.5admins.com. Peter writes, I'm sadly having to move off my Linux laptop at work as they're giving me a MacBook Air and I suspect it's locked down. A colleague installed a VPN client which was detected and he was tapped on the shoulder by cyber to remove it. So my question is, how to connect my network devices without a VPN from a corporate device that is fairly well locked down? I'm currently using WireGuard. Perhaps via a Jumpbox machine hosted by a provider that I know I can get to via a web interface. What do you recommend?
Well, the first thing is I recommend probably don't do that, because what you're asking is, how do I get around the policies that my employer has set regarding network access? And there are any number of technical ways to do that. But I mean, again, you're asking us, how do I break policy? Well, do you want to stay hired?
Yeah, but if you do need something like that, you can get software like Teleport that you could install on a VPS, and you basically go to a website and it provides you kind of an SSH tunnel through that website onto the secure server. It's basically a way to basically have a jump host that is a web server. And so you can do authentication to it, and then you're just going to a website on your work machine, and it's probably not as against the policy as running an arbitrary VPN, but you can still SSH to stuff that is not publicly accessible elsewhere on the internet.
Yeah, Apache Guacamole is probably a pretty good fit for that. You can install Guacamole on whatever web server you have access to, and then, like Alan said, you're just visiting a site in a browser. And one of the reasons this isn't going to be, at the very least, it's not going to be as ugly if your employer catches wind of what you're doing, is because there's no direct connection, with like your file system, anything else that's going on. It's kind of a different scenario than running a full local SSH client where you could literally just SCP data from the corporate network out. So if all you're wanting to do is access your stuff on the outside without actually connecting it to the inside in, more of a data exfiltration kind of way, Guacamole looks like a pretty good answer to me.
Something I thought about was possibly if you could get a virtual machine installed, you could maybe install WireGuard or Tailscale or whatever inside that, and that might hide it a little bit from IT.
It depends on the enforcement mechanisms being used. In some cases, the ID department is literally just going to be monitoring access patterns. They're going to be looking at flows. They're going to be looking at non-standard ports that you hit. And they're going to be using anything from old school algorithms to sometimes AI models trying to figure out, does any of this look sketchy? And for that kind of monitoring and enforcement, running out of a VM isn't going to do you any good whatsoever because you still have to go on the network and out. Now, that does raise the interesting possibility, well, what if you maybe connect to your cell phone hotspot when you want to do that? That would be a lot more likely to evade the corporate overlords, but it also would very much not look good if you got caught. Which brings me back again to the whole idea of running Guacamole, which in addition to being an SSH client, it can also operate as a VNC and an RDP client, and it is completely clientless. You don't have to install anything on the machine at work. You are literally just connecting to the page with a browser, and everything necessary happens inside the context of that session. No software installed, no fuss, no muss.
I will take this opportunity to plug Linux After Dark episode 120. On that, Chris got a MacBook Air, I think, that was completely locked down, and he didn't even have sudo on it. And he talked about his various workarounds. I don't think specifically for this, but you might find this useful, Peter, just generally, some of the tips and tricks that he found, because he's very good at researching stuff. So, plug for one of our other shows, Linux After Dark episode 120. I'll put a link in the show notes. Right, well, we better get out of here then. Remember, show at 2.5admins.com if you want to send in your questions or your feedback. You can find me at joelrest.com/mastodon.
You can find me at mercenarysysadmin.com.
And you can find me at alanjude.com.
We'll see you next week.